Senator Whitehouse didn't walk to the Senate floor to make headlines. He walked in to drop evidence. In a chamber used to sound bites and slogans, his words cut through like a scalpel. He said everyone keeps talking about weaponization of the justice system, but no one's looking at who's actually holding the weapon. Then, without raising his voice, he traced the fingerprints straight to the leadership of the Department of Justice under Patel. He began with something that sounded simple: a climate fund. Money Congress approved to help communities rebuild, create green jobs, and invest in clean energy. Nothing controversial, until Patel's team at the Justice Department quietly turned it into a target.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm here for the 35th time to call attention to the right-wing scheme to capture our courts and justice system, now out to target and persecute Trump political enemies and do Trump political favors. We have heard a lot about weaponization of the justice system from Trump and his allies. That's for two reasons. One, it's a handy narrative for Trump and MAGA cronies to paint him as a victim, not a convicted criminal who only dodged proper sentencing and further criminal charges because of sweeping presidential immunity granted by a Supreme Court stacked with right-wing justices he appointed. Two, it's a tactic for would-be autocrats. Accusations signal intentions. You accuse the other side of doing what you're plotting so that when you're caught doing it, you've set it up to look like offsetting penalties. Accusations signal intentions. And sure enough, now there's real weaponization of the justice system unfolding before our eyes. I'm going to take a minute and drill down into one episode. It begins with a climate fund, duly created and appropriated by Congress, maintained after the funds were disbursed at a private bank, and overseen by EPA. But MAGA's dear leader claims, falsely, that climate change is a hoax. That's his catchphrase for the truest things he doesn't like. So this climate fund became a MAGA target. There is a problem, however. The Constitution limits the president's veto power over congressional spending, both with a time limit and the right of Congress to override. And the time limit to veto these funds had been over for years. The funds were properly appropriated back in August 2022, when President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act. The grants were awarded in April 2024, giving recipients legal rights to the funds. And then they were distributed to the bank as fiscal agent for the recipients, all in regular order. Enter Trump's corrupt Justice Department through two colossal Trump suck-ups. The acting Deputy Attorney General, Emil Bovee, and Ed Martin, the interim United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. Martin is an activist MAGA type, a lawyer for January 6 attackers, who had criticized this fund even before he was appointed interim. Bovee and Martin cooked up asking Martin's U.S. Attorney's Office to freeze the climate fund by opening a criminal investigation so they could assert that the ongoing investigation justified the freeze. Their problem? They couldn't point to a crime. Oops. The career criminal division chief, an experienced veteran prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office, pointed out that launching a criminal investigation without evidence of a crime, what prosecutors call predication, is a violation of prosecutorial ethics and Department of Justice policy. That warning from the career prosecutors to MAGA Martin, that's red flag 1. But the MAGA U.S. attorney didn't listen to that warning from his career staff. Instead, he demanded that the career criminal chief resign. He forced her out. Well, that's another big red flag. Red flag 2. With the criminal division chief out of the way, Martin still couldn't find one staff prosecutor in his office to pursue the matter. Now, you remember in the Nixon Saturday Night Massacre, they had to fire all the way down to Robert Bork, who became notorious for ultimately doing the dirty deed for Nixon. But here, no Bork, no prosecutor would sign from this big federal prosecution office. That's red flag 3. Martin then proceeded in his own name alone. That's red flag 4. As a former U.S. attorney, I can assure you there is almost always a career attorney's signature on every pleading filed. And bear in mind that Martin is not some rare legal whiz. He'd never spent a single day as a federal prosecutor before he got this gig. And here he was, fumbling around by his lone MAGA self. So no surprise when Martin presented his request to the federal magistrate judge, the judge denied the petition. That's red flag 5. And it's a massive, flapping red flag to anyone who has served in a U.S. attorney's office. Federal prosecutors never want this to happen. So they triple check and backstop every application to ensure that they are ironclad. In my U.S. attorney's office, a federal judge shooting down one of our warrant applications would have set off internal reviews. That should be what's known in the medical field as a never event. It's a shocker, particularly with the U.S. attorney presenting the petition in person. Even that series of disasters didn't.
The fund had already been signed into law, the grants awarded, and the money distributed properly through a private bank under EPA oversight. But for Patel's circle, it wasn't about policy, it was about control. They couldn't cancel the program legally, so they tried something else. They would criminalize it. According to Senator Whitehouse, the Patel-led DOJ greenlit a plan to open a criminal investigation into that fund without evidence of any wrongdoing. The acting Deputy Attorney General Emile Bove and the interim U.S. Attorney for D.C., Ed Martin, both closely aligned with Patel, wanted to freeze the money by calling it under investigation. They called it protecting taxpayers. But the truth was darker. There was no predication, no proof, and no crime. That's where the first red flag appeared. Inside the U.S. Attorney's office, career prosecutors immediately pushed back. They warned leadership that launching a probe without evidence violates DOJ policy and ethical rules. But rather than taking the warning seriously, Patel's circle did the unthinkable. They silenced it. The veteran criminal division chief who raised the alarm was told to step down. Whitehouse called it what it was, the first purge, removing career officials for refusing to cross ethical lines. Red flag 2. Once she was gone, the office became a ghost ship. No one wanted to touch the fake investigation. Not one career prosecutor would sign their name to it. That's when Ed Martin, with Patel's full backing, took matters into his own hands. He filed the motion himself, without a single line of career oversight. As Whitehouse, a former U.S. attorney, reminded the chamber, that almost never happens. In a real investigation, every document is double-checked by experienced attorneys. But not this one. This was a one-man show designed to look like justice while running entirely on politics. The next red flag came fast. A federal magistrate judge reviewed Martin's request and denied it immediately. No crime, no evidence, no justification. Normally, that kind of rejection would trigger internal reviews and reprimands. But under Patel's DOJ, the only response was escalation. When the court said no, they tried to find a court that would say yes. Whitehouse described it as case shopping, sending the same dead investigation around to other U.S. attorneys' offices, hoping one would play along. Red flag 3. That's when the situation crossed from reckless to dangerous. A prosecutor in Florida, someone with connections to Patel's network, suddenly ordered Washington-based FBI agents to start questioning EPA employees about the climate fund. These were civil servants who had followed every rule, now being treated like suspects because politics demanded it. Whitehouse paused at that part of his speech, looked up, and said, "This is what real weaponization looks like." He wasn't exaggerating. When a Justice Department begins using criminal authority to chase policy goals, democracy starts to bend. Then came the judiciary pushback. A separate federal judge in another case examined Patel's team's justification for freezing the funds, claims of possible fraud, and asked for evidence. They had none. The judge's decision was clear. There is no factual basis for these accusations. That was red flag 4, and it should have ended the charade. But instead, the Patel-run DOJ went public. They started making statements, suggesting the EPA had mishandled taxpayer money. No charges, no evidence, just accusations. Whitehouse reminded the chamber that such behavior is a direct violation of DOJ policy. Publicly smearing people connected to an investigation with no findings is not only unethical, it's defamatory. That was red flag 5. From there, the story reads like a slow-motion collapse. Internal ethics officers warned again that continuing without evidence could expose the department to lawsuits. Those warnings were buried. Career attorneys who refused to play along were reassigned or excluded from meetings. Whitehouse said what many were afraid to say out loud. The justice system was being reprogrammed to serve political outcomes. Patel wasn't doing it with public speeches. He was doing it with signatures, firings, and silence. That's how institutional capture happens. Quietly. One procedural violation at a time. What's striking about Whitehouse's speech is how methodical it was. He didn't rely on adjectives. He relied on red flags, 7 of them, laid out like evidence in a courtroom. 1. Launching a case without predication. 2. Firing the career chief who objected. 3. Filing a loan without a career signature. 4. Being rejected by a federal judge. 5. Shopping the case across districts. 6. Using FBI agents from another state to harass EPA staff. 7. Making public, defamatory comments about a case with no evidence. One after another, each step violated long-standing DOJ norms. Then he drew the comparison. In other high-profile federal cases, cases that were loudly accused of being political, none of these red flags existed. No ignored warnings, no purges, no judges rejecting filings for lack of merit. Every motion had a career prosecutor's name. Every warrant was judicially approved. Oversight held firm. Whitehouse said, red flag count in those cases, 0. Red flag count in this one, 7. It wasn't partisan theater. It was a mathematical contrast. What he was really showing wasn't just misconduct. It was method. The method of turning the Justice Department into a political instrument. Step 1. Find a policy target. Step 2. Create a false legal pretext. Step 3. Remove the professionals who resist. Step 4. Use public statements to seed the narrative. Step 5. Hope the noise drowns out the evidence. And under Patel's tenure, every one of those steps had already been taken. That's what makes this so dangerous. Because if this kind of manipulation can freeze something as routine as a climate fund, it can freeze anything: research grants, disaster aid, whistleblower protections. The precedent is terrifying. If an administration doesn't like a congressional program, it can just invent a fraud story to stop it. That's not oversight. That's sabotage disguised as law. White House's warning went beyond politics. He said that once the Justice Department becomes a tool for partisanship, every American's rights are at risk. Today it's a climate program. Tomorrow it could be an election board, a journalist, or an activist. The same mechanisms Patel's DOJ used to pursue imaginary fraud could be used to pursue imaginary dissent. The difference between a democracy and an autocracy is not who's in charge. It's whether the law stays neutral. He also pointed to the human cost. The career civil servants who manage that fund are now fighting reputational damage, stress, and fear of retaliation. Their work was meant to help towns recover from floods and fires. Instead, they're being painted as criminals. That's how institutions crumble, not through coups, but through corrosion. Toward the end of his speech, Whitehouse shifted from outrage to blueprint. He proposed reforms that sounded technical but cut straight to the heart of the problem. Make predication standards public and reviewable by inspectors general. Protect career prosecutors with whistleblower laws so they can't be fired for following ethics. Tighten restrictions on public commentary from officials. And most importantly, strengthen congressional and judicial oversight to stop case shopping before it metastasizes. These aren't partisan fixes. They're safeguards for democracy itself that he closed with a line that hung in the air. If they'll go through all of this just to seize a climate fund, imagine what they'll do when something bigger is at stake. That's the part no one wanted to answer. Because it's not hypothetical, it's a warning. And the person sitting at the top of this operation, the one signing off on every step, was Kash Patel. Whitehouse didn't shout his name for drama. He said it because it mattered. Because accountability has names. And when a Justice Department turns its investigative power against lawful programs, the people running it deserve scrutiny. The rule of law doesn't collapse in a day. It collapses in increments. One bad order, one silence, one compromised official at a time. That if you've listened this far, you've seen what most people miss. The machinery behind the word weaponization. It's not a slogan. It's a process. And it's already running. The only defense left is awareness. The more citizens understand how justice can be bent, the harder it becomes to bend it. That's why Whitehouse's warning isn't just for senators. It's for anyone who still believes law should protect people, not punish truth. So before you scroll away, remember this. What's being exposed isn't history. It's happening. Every red flag he listed is a test of whether the system still works, or whether power now outweighs principle. If this breakdown opened your eyes to how control is built quietly, piece by piece, make sure to subscribe, hit like, and turn on notifications. Because the only way to defend the truth is to understand exactly how it's being twisted. And the only way to stop it is together.